Um, my full name is Leslyn Hanakahi. Like I said, I go by Les. Please go ahead and feel free to use that. I want this to be a super informal session. As we say in the islands, I want to just talk story. So feel free to interrupt at any point. If I'm looking to the side, it's because that's where I've got the display of all of you. And wow, why am I not? There we go. So what I'm going to try and do today is, first I want to get to know you all who's attending and kind of talk about what you're hoping to get out of this session. Then I'm going to briefly share my journey from growing up in Hawaii and how I winded up here in Illinois. And then some possible topics for open discussion about role models, expectations, and helping others. Although I believe Keiko, in your notes, you said that I think Chastity had prepared also some other questions that we can discuss, and I'm totally flexible. We can go any direction that suits you all best. So getting into a little bit about learning about each other, what I'm going to ask you to do is turn your camera off for right now. I see everybody's pretty much doing that. If you don't have your cameras off, please turn them off. And for this interactive session, I'm going to be asking you questions. To agree, just turn your camera back on so we all get a visual sense of who's saying yes and who's not saying yes. If you're not comfortable participating, please just leave your video off the whole time. And remember, this is being recorded. So again, if you're not comfortable giving your responses for the recording, just go ahead and leave your camera off for the whole time. So I want to get a sense of what part of UIC are you from, like who's represented here. So first, if I can get all of the undergraduate students to turn your cameras on, let me get a look at you and see who's there. Or great, Sin, just give me a thumbs up if you're an undergraduate, if you don't want to turn your camera on. So we've got a couple of undergraduates. I see Keiko with her camera on. Hi, Faith. We've got Kaylin, a bunch of people. Okay, so we've got about a third of participants are self-identifying as undergraduate students. Great, good. And then can I get the graduate or professional students to turn your cameras on? So I see Chastity, or if you don't want to, you can just give me a thumbs up. Great, so we've got 2 graduate and professional students, if I'm right. Next question is faculty and staff. So who else is here, faculty and staff? Kaylee, nice to see you. Marissa, hi. John, hi. Darima, Tall. All right, great. So we have a sense of what cross-section of the university we've got here. Thank you very much for indulging me. It also gives me a chance to see everybody's faces very briefly. So go ahead and turn your cameras on now if you want. And what I want to talk about, either verbally or I'd say in the chat, but I can't see the chat. There it is. Or in the chat, you know, why are you attending this session? What do you hope to gain from this experience? And if you're comfortable sharing for the purpose of the recording, go ahead and just turn your mic on, tell me out loud, or throw something in the chat. Linda says, I want to hear your story about my experiences. Okay. Anybody else? Hear more about your story, learn about experiences. Great. I'm happy to hear that. Definitely happy to share. Aina, learning more about my journey. Toll, how we got into the sciences. Okay, I'll be sure to touch on that. Kaylee, I work with a lot of pre-health students, so very interested in the journey. And Kai, what's it like being a POC in STEM? Yeah, good questions, everyone. Thank you so much for indulging me. I appreciate that. So going back to the slideshow, if I can figure out how to work technical. So my journey, I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm Native Hawaiian by ancestry and a Hawaiian Islander, or what we in the islands call local. Long story. very confusing because local simply means where you are, but not in Hawaii. And I'm local by upbringing. And I make the distinction because I know a lot of people in the islands who are not Native Hawaiian by birth, but are very Hawaiian where it counts. And so, you know, and I like to include those folks when I think about people that are Hawaiian. So I am also a third generation Japanese immigrant. My grandfather immigrated from Japan. He came over on the boat, as we say in Hawaii, and he was very unfortunately interred as a Japanese national. He was interred at a site on Sand Island Access Road, and it's super funny because when I was growing up, Sand Island Park or that area, that internment camp became a dump, like literally a trash dump. So where hundreds of Japanese nationals were interred against their will became a dump. And then about 20 years ago, City and County of Honolulu rolled that over into a really beautiful park. And so it's a lot nicer now. It's a lot cleaner. My ethnic heritage also includes Chinese, but within our family, we have no idea where and who that comes from, because all of those elements are kind of lost. And part of that has to do with the Native Hawaiian upbringing. So my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, is where I get the Hawaiian from. And Native Hawaiians have a practice that we call hanai, that is to give a child away. So let's say that I have a big family, I have lots of children, and my sister is not as blessed. I might hanai, or give a child to my sister. So my grandfather was hanai from the Hanakahi family to the Apo family. And the Apo family lived on the island of Kauai, whereas the Hanakahi family, the majority of the family were on the Big Island. And so my grandfather was removed from his family and, you know, raised with loving care by the Apos. But because of that, because that happened at such an early age, he was completely cut off from the Hanakahis. He retained his name Hanakahi, but had almost no contact. And remember, you know, this is all in the age kind of when even telephones were scarce. So we really grew up separated from the Hanakahi family. And it really wasn't until he passed that I met his brothers and other cousins. Like I had this whole family that I had no idea about because my granddad was Hanai. And the Chinese comes from my grandfather's side. And so, you know, we don't even know where that comes from because he passed without telling us. So getting on into my journey from Hawaii to Illinois via England, I got my BS in biology from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. I was the first in my family to earn a college degree. A number of folks in my family had started college or got associate's degrees, but nobody before me, at least in my immediate family, had earned a college degree. So that was kind of exciting. Fortunately for me, my mother was a teacher, kindergarten, first grade teacher, and she instilled in our family a real love of education and learning. So it was almost not a question that I would go to college. We were also extremely poor. So when I won a one-year scholarship at the Hawaii State Science Fair, my father just looked at me and said, guess where you're going? So I didn't even apply out. I applied to UH, I got in, you know, that was all we could afford. So that's where I went. I got as Keiko mentioned, I got my Ph.D. from Yale University. My degree is in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. And, you know, this was traveling away from Hawaii, which very few people do. So because some of you asked about the journey, let me fill you in on a little bit of the background behind the story, because it involves a person that I like to refer to as my grumpy Jewish fairy godfather. So when I was at UH Manoa, I was an undergraduate pursuing my honors thesis work in a molecular genetics lab. You may not know this, but there are wallabies in Hawaii. I'm not kidding. That was my honors thesis, studying a colony of rock wallabies that actually inhabit one of the valleys in Hawaii. So there are our marsupial mammals in Hawaii. And in that molecular genetics lab, there was a grumpy graduate student, Ph.D. student by the name of Bob Feldman. And, we would talk a little bit about my career. Bob was from California. And so he's originally from Chicago, then to California, and he had a completely different take on life and reality as compared to me, an islander. So when I was going to college, I just assumed I was going to go to UH for my bachelor's. And then once I decided I wanted to get a PhD, there was almost no question in my mind that I would stay at home in Hawaii and go to the University of Hawaii to get my PhD, because this is what people in Hawaii do. We stay home. And Bob looked at me and he said, no, that's completely unacceptable. That's academic inbreeding. I was already accepted into the PhD program in the genetics department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And Bob said, you've already learned everything that you can, not really, but a lot from these people. You have to go someplace else and learn new things from new people. And so I said, well, there's no genetics department at the University of Hawaii at Hilo, because that was the only other campus. What am I going to do? And he says, you're going to have to leave Hawaii. And I looked at him like he had grown a second head, because people from the islands just don't leave. And then a couple of weeks of discussing this with Bob, and with his encouragement, I selected the usual set of schools to apply to. 2 dream schools, 3 schools that I thought I had a really good chance of getting into. And then my safety was University of Hawaii at Manoa, because I already had early acceptance. So I applied to Yale, Stanford as my 2 dream schools. I applied to Scripps Oceanographic Institute. I applied to a pharmacology department, actually, at the University of Oregon, and then the biology department at the University of Oregon as my kind of state school middle, think I've really got a chance. And the other thing I will tell you about I applied for graduate schools for matriculation for admission in 1990. And so this was just getting into the Clinton era affirmative action policies. And so there was a lot of funding for underrepresented minorities, particularly going into STEM careers. And so being a Native Hawaiian and one of the most underrepresented minorities in the STEM disciplines, I was like gold to all of these departments. And so I was accepted everywhere, Stanford, Yale, Scripps, everywhere. Cue the music for Imposter Syndrome, because is it me? Am I really being accepted at Yale? Do I really deserve to go to Yale? Or is it just because I'm Native Hawaiian and they get to tick their little box saying that we are actively recruiting URMs? And we can discuss the whole imposter complex, because it's a very real thing. And those of us that have benefited from the Clinton era sort of financial incentives to pursue STEM careers at very high levels, I also have this kind of albatross that we carry around with us, because we're really not sure that we measure up. So many things happened, and again, thanks to Bob, I wound up traveling from Hawaii to New Haven, Connecticut, which is a very cold place, and getting my PhD in molecular biophysics and biochemistry at Yale University. That took me about 6 years, and I'll say I loved it. I absolutely loved being in New Haven. I loved getting my PhD and interacting with and hanging out with some of the best and the brightest that I've ever met. That was a great journey. I was also my first in my family to earn a PhD. So this was something that my parents were completely out of their water in dealing with what I wanted to do. I wanted to get a college degree. I wanted to leave the islands. I wanted to get a PhD. And I mentioned that I grew up poor. I grew up in one of the kind of slummy areas of the city and county of Honolulu, a district called Kalihi. And it's not the kind of highly densely packed urban slum that we think about when we think about bad areas. This was not quite so densely packed, but there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of crime. And so my parents had very low expectations of a child raised in that environment. To my mom and my dad, it's like, you're not in jail, take the win. So the fact that I wanted to go to Yale and do all these other things, they're like, whatever, you're not in jail. So, they were mildly enthusiastic and incredibly supportive. They had no idea what I was doing. If you go to Hawaii and you say like Yale University or Stanford or Harvard to people in Hawaii, they'll look at you like and say, what is that? And that actually happened to me over dinner once. My mother was proudly announcing that I was at Yale, and her colleague said, what is that? Is that like one of those small private schools? And I said, yes, it is. Because Hawaii is a completely different world, and a lot of you may experience that kind of disconnect between the world that you're currently in and the world that exists kind of back at home. Hi, did somebody have a question? Nope. Okay, so barging on forward, Ph.D. from Yale University, and then I obtained a Human Frontiers Science program, post-doctoral fellowship, and that took me to the Imperial Cancer Research Fund in the United Kingdom, in England. So traveling, well, now outside of America. I was the first in my family to work outside of Hawaii or the US. The HSFP fellowship is an international fellowship. You apply, and it supports the individual postdoctoral fellow and the project that they're working on. So I was already accepted as a postdoc at the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. I had a project waiting for me, and just by luck, I don't know if I want to call it that, I was able to secure my own funding, which was really nice, and it helped with the imposter syndrome. The fact that the HFSP fellowship is a highly competitive international fellowship. This was something that did not benefit from the Clinton era affirmative action initiatives. So, this was something that I competed for and received on my own merits. And so it did help defer, some of that imposter syndrome. But I will say the fellowship that I had to obtain my PhD, because I had a pre-doctoral fellowship, that was a minority pre-doctoral fellowship. And, some of the bumps along the road, I do remember having conversations with people about competing for funding, getting fellowships, getting grants, and having people say, oh no, like real grants, not that minority stuff. And, people still say that to me, even in my career now. So you do get a little bit of that dampening, but, I don't want to throw water on all of this, because it still is a really good story. So I went to England. I drove on the other side of the road, which you may know, the driver's side is not on the left-hand side. The driver's side is on the right-hand side. I bought a car there because where I was working is this tiny little like one pub village, and you had to be able to drive to get anywhere out in the English countryside. So I bought a car. I bought a car from an American postdoc that had just finished in my lab, and she was leaving. I was coming in. And so I bought this car from her via email. Never saw the car, never drove it. It was just there in the parking lot at work. When I got there, I walked in and they said, hello, Dr. Hanakahi, here are the keys to your new car. And I didn't know that it was a stick shift. So I learned to drive a standard shifting with my left hand, which was super interesting. But humans are wonderful things. We can teach ourselves just about anything. So I did not crash driving on the other side of the road, on the other side of the car, shifting with my other hand in the UK. It did make coming and going from the UK and the US kind of interesting because I drove on the wrong side of the road so often when I would come back to America. I'd be like driving on the wrong side of the road. I'm like, oh God, there's somebody coming right at me. Oh no, I'm on the wrong side of the road. And then for like the first 3 days when I get back to the UK, I was doing the same things. Like, why are people driving on my side of the road? So that was fun. I really enjoyed being abroad. And for the students, both graduate students and the undergraduates, if you have the opportunity to travel abroad, to go to the UK, to go to Europe, to pursue your training or to pursue a portion of your career, do it. It is a fabulous experience. One of the things that was super strange about being in England and being Hawaiian is they did not consider me to be American. Now, Hawaii is the 50th state. Everybody knows that. And in England, they knew that, but they just said, oh, you're not American, you're Hawaiian. And so that was a little weird, but they loved the concept of Hawaii. And so to my colleagues at work, I embodied all of that: sunshine, the Aloha spirit, interesting food, things that come out of the sea. So it was really, it was fun. It was interesting to be really valued as a Native Hawaiian for all of the sunny things that Hawaii means to people in the UK. After I finished my postdoctoral fellowship, I started applying for my first academic job, and that was as an assistant professor. And I was interviewing for 2 years, and my postdoctoral advisor had prepared me for that. He said, the first year you're going to go out there, you're going to interview, and you're going to suck. You're going to have no idea what's going on. Your written statements are going to be okay. He said, don't worry about it. Just keep at it. The second year when you apply, your written statements are going to be great because you'll have worked it all out. And you're going to walk into your interviews. And his phrase that he used was holding court. You're going to walk into your interviews and you're going to hold court. You're going to be so in control of your information. You're going to be so confident in what you know because you've been through trial by fire for the first set of interviews. The second year is when you get your job. And I thought, not me, man, I'm special. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get a job on the first round. Yeah, no. It was exactly as he said, and he should know because he's raised so many successful scientists, and he's also interviewed so many successful scientists for the Imperial Cancer Research Fund. So the first year was interviews, and it was great experience, but that's all it was. Interviews, no offers. Second year was when the interviews turned into offers, and I ended up accepting the position at the Johns Hopkins University, the Department of Biochemistry at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. So I moved back to America. And I like to joke that my history, my personal history has been alternating between beautiful places and really kind of scary urban environments. So I grew up in Hawaii, beautiful place. I got my Ph.D. in New Haven, Connecticut. If anybody's ever been to New Haven, it is a scary urban place. I did my postdoctoral training in this tiny little village with like this research site that housed 200 scientists, and we were outnumbered by sheep in the English countryside. It was gorgeous. There was one pub, it was in walking distance. And then I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, which is another, like New Haven, Connecticut, another scary urban setting. So after Johns Hopkins, at Johns Hopkins, I'll be honest, things didn't go so well. I was not put up for tenure. Unfortunately, kind of nobody from my department was put up for tenure, and that kind of turned into a thing. The dean of the School of Public Health turned over, so they had a new dean, and the dean called for a review of all the department chairs, and it came out that our department chair had hired 15 new faculty during his time. And hiring assistant professors is not cheap. The startup packages can range from several $100,000 to $1 million. So the School of Public Health was putting a lot of money into these new hires. And out of the 15 new hires, of which I was one, only a single individual had ever been promoted. And so that caused quite a stir. Unfortunately, all of this came to bear after myself and the three other colleagues that were hired at the same time were all refused tenure by the department. And so we scattered to the winds. And I ended up, thankfully, here at UIC. I started off as an assistant professor. I was then promoted with tenure, so I'm an associate professor now. And throughout my entire career, I've been studying DNA damage and repair, and that's what my lab studies right now. So yeah, kind of a fun journey with a couple of bumps in the road, but always looking up. What else can I say? Well, that's my story for those of you that wanted to hear it. And I wanted to get into a discussion section now. And more importantly, I wanted to know, what do the students want to talk about, or what do you want to talk about? And you can throw it in the chat or go ahead and turn on your mics. And if not, I think I've got some prepared topics for discussion, or I think Keiko had mentioned that some of the other students may have topics for discussion that they wanted to start.
Les, can I ask, have you wanted to come back to Hawaii professionally, or how do you feel about that?
Sure, Tall, great question. Coming back to Hawaii, I would love to go back to Hawaii, but, and this is going to get sort of into one of the discussion points that I'd want to break, that I'd prepared to break into, and that is being a role model. So in Hawaii, like a lot of other places, is experiencing a catastrophic brain drain. The best and the brightest do exactly what I did. We leave, we go to great schools, we get great educations, we develop great careers, and we never come back to Hawaii. And so the University of Hawaii is under constant pressure to stem the brain drain and to bring the kids back home. And so at every stage of my career, I get contacted by somebody from the University of Hawaii. They want me to come and interview for this position or that position, and I go. And without fail, the salary and the conditions are much less than I could pull in what we would in Hawaii we would call stateside, in the mainland. And when I ask them about this, why is my salary 1/3 of what I would be making, say, at University of Illinois, when the cost of living in Hawaii is higher? And they say, oh, but your family's here. Don't you want to come back to your family and your culture? So to me, these people are holding my family and my culture hostage. And if I want to come back to it, I have to step down in salary. And I will not do that, because while I did not have role models growing up, there were no Polynesian or Pacific Islander females around for me to watch and see how they behaved as they ascended their careers. I am one, whether I like it or not. And if I take those jobs at 1/3 pay rate, what am I saying to all of the young ladies and all the young men, all the Pacific Islanders that I'm going to teach and interact with when I'm at University of Hawaii? That they should accept less than they are worth just to have what the university thinks they want. And so I won't do that. And every single time they offer these jobs at less than competitive wages, I tell them no, and I tell them exactly why. And I do it in a documented form, so emails or written letters, so that hopefully these comments make their way up the food chain, and they realize they can't do this to us, or they shouldn't be doing this to us. They should be offering me the same wage that they offer a white man from Nebraska. and I'm not going to go back there for anything less. So Toll, kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's important for our young people to know that they will be getting these offers and that they should look those gift horses right in the mouth and make sure that they are getting what they are worth. And they should decide whether they want to accept less. I have decided not to, but this is a decision that we all have to face. Until I hope that answers your question. I see Linda's asking, did I feel that there was support from you on your journey? Did those persons make a huge difference in my journey or travels? Faith asked, if I offered proper pay, would I move back? Faith, yes, I would. If they would match the salary that I'm making stateside, I would seriously consider it. If they would match the salary and the startup, that is, if they would give me a bloody competitive offer, I'd seriously consider it. In the same way that I would consider a competitive offer from any place, if it's in back at Johns Hopkins or anywhere else, I would consider a competitive offer. But I will not consider offers that are not competitive. To get at Linda's question, there were a lot of people that supported me. My grumpy fairy godfather, Bob, really talked me through the process of applying for graduate school. My PhD thesis advisor, who is a wonderful woman named Nancy Maisels, she was fabulous support. There were also some real dark times, and I will tell you, the nexus of graduate school and imposter syndrome. So when I first got to Yale, the first year of graduate studies is didactic courses and some research on the side. And so coming out of the University of Hawaii at Manoa with an honors degree, practically a straight A student, I thought I was really smart. Now, like many of you, when I was in high school, I didn't have to lift a finger. I did not break a sweat to get good grades. The same was true in college. I did not have to study very hard. I crammed, the night before up till 2 a.m. the night before for the organic exam. I did that kind of studying. I got to Yale, was prepared to do extremely well in my classes because that's what my life had been. My first midterms were solid Fs. I face planted. And I'm looking at these grades and the imposter syndrome is staring me in the face. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I reached too far. Yale is an Ivy League school, even though I had no idea what it was when I applied. Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe the only reason they accepted me is because of the affirmative action initiatives of the Clinton era. So there were all of these doubts. And it was a really dark personal time. I'll say also, this is before I realized, before SAD or seasonal affective disorder was a real big thing. And I also didn't realize that I was suffering from this, because let's think about it. I started graduate school in September. I'm in Connecticut. The days are getting shorter. It's colder. I don't realize that I'm suffering from SAD and I'm living in student housing, which is dimly lit. At midterms, which is about late October, I've just failed my set of midterms, and my classes were, just midterm and final. So if I wanted to stay in graduate school, I needed A's on the finals because I got F's on the midterms. So, it was a dark time for me, both literally and figuratively. And I almost left. I almost withdrew. But then, as my family will tell you, I give stubborn a whole new meaning. And I said, no, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do my best. And they are going to have to throw me out kicking and screaming. I'm not going to accept less from myself. And so I shut down all social aspects of my life. I did nothing but study. I went from studying as a solo actor, because that's all I had ever done, to trying everything, studying in groups. I tried everything I could, and I did nothing but study for classes. And I did get those A's that I needed. And I did eventually stay in graduate school, but that was a really difficult time. I talk about this experience with students a lot, particularly here in the College of Pharmacy, where a lot of students in their first years are having the exact same experience. Sailed through high school on their natural intellect. Maybe they broke a sweat in college, worked a little hard, and then they hit their pharmacy school classes and they face plant. And they're thinking about withdrawing. And for them, for those that I've worked with, they find it really comforting that somebody who is now one of their professors had exactly their same experience. And just by grit, continued on, and there was a light at the end of that tunnel. So there were dark days. And, as it is with depression, there was nobody there for me because I didn't reach out. It's not that there wasn't anybody there for me. I had friends, I had family, I had a fabulous advisor. But as we do when we're depressed, I closed in on myself. And that really was a mistake. And it was a mistake that could have gone very badly for me had I not just had a stubborn streak a mile wide. I see Karen saying, for students who are experiencing the imposter syndrome, do you have suggestions for how to confront it? And yeah, if anybody does have suggestions, either activate your mic and go ahead and just break right in, or throw it in the chat. Faith is saying, do I think everyone should have to have that face plant moment so they can learn from it? Wow, Faith, that's a really hard question. I wouldn't wish that on anybody because it was really dark times. And I think had there been underlying other issues, and okay, this might be oversharing, but there were underlying other issues for me, underlying other psychological issues, and they got really, really bad. When I was in high school, when I was young, I was heavy. And so my nickname was Atomic 2 growing up. It was that when it wasn't Butterball. So I was kind of on the heavy side. So I always had kind of like a body image issues. A lot of Pacific Islanders have body image issues because our cultures are into eating and our people can be big. So growing up that way, and my mother was horrible about my weight. She would write my weight like on the front of my school pictures that she would send to people. So everybody knew that at 9 years old, I was 110 pounds. I'm like 120 pounds now. Like since I was over 45 years, I've grown like 10 pounds. But that's how fat I was as a kid. So severe body image issues. This turned into eating disorders when I was in high school. And my mother was putting me through beauty pageants because she wanted a pageant queen daughter. And I thought I had that under control while I was in college. That just came back during the dark days in graduate school. Failing the exams, no light. Oh my God, the body image issues, the failure issues, the eating disorders. I was starving myself or pigging out and then starving myself. And it was bad. Faith, I would never wish that on anybody because all the demons that you think you've locked away just come roaring back when you're in that weakened state. It is something that I have had to go through. And so, like I said, I share it liberally. And I've come to terms with it because I think a lot of students and other people too can gain from my experience. And so I've become comfortable with sharing it. Keiki says, oh yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I was just wondering, were you able to get mental health support?
For that, like I said, I never reached out when I was in crisis. Once I got out of crisis, and then, so I got myself out of crisis. I got my grades up. That was great. And then a friend was visiting, and she looked around my little apartment. She's like, "My God, it's dark in here. We're going shopping." And we go out and we bought one lamp, and we put this thing in my student housing apartment. And my world changed. And I realized at that point that I suffer terribly from SAD. So now, ever since that moment in 1991, I always make sure that my living quarters and anywhere I am is well lit. So I gain tools to combat that. I confronted the eating disorders when I realized that a coworker of mine suffered from the same. So once I had a peer who I saw eye to eye to, who was going through the same thing that I was, and we didn't interact over it. We didn't really support each other other than sharing books. Like, we didn't talk about it because neither of us were comfortable as young adult women, like talking about it in great detail. It was also a time when America was very concerned about eating disorders. You may remember Karen Carpenter and her anorexia nervosa. That kind of brought everything to the foreground in the mid to late 80s. It was still something that you didn't talk about, but we shared books, and I was able to get a lot of relief from those self-help books that were shared. Now, whenever I go through a major change in life, romantic breakup, changing careers, relocation, I see a counselor. I make myself see a counselor for no less than 5 visits, because, when you see a new counselor, it takes a while to kind of get that jive going. And once you get that sense of trust, then you can feel like, okay, I really am stable. I'm not just faking it. So now I make sure that I reach out for that mental health, just to make sure. And according to all of my therapists, I've never ever needed to come in for those, but I don't want to take the chance anymore. So, Karen, I hope that answers your question in kind of a roundabout way.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing about that and just how important it is to reach out, and keep that in mind. I do want to do a time check. It's 1:25, and I know our event was scheduled to end at 1:30. If anyone does need to leave at 1:30, we understand, and but we still have some time, so please keep asking questions or comments.
Linda, your story is inspiring. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome, Linda. Thank you very much for spending the time. Kaylee, thanks so much. Yeah, and thanks to everybody who put this event on. This is the kind of thing that didn't exist back when I was coming up through the system. And it's really wonderful that you're building this machine to bring students together, Pacific Island students together, to both meet each other, gain support, and network.
I see another question in the chat from Jung-sun.
Oh, did I miss something? Where's that? Where's that, Faith?
I can read it out for you.
Yeah, please do.
What do you think about the higher education in Hawaii for Pacific Islander students? Do you think they are serving their students well for their growth and success?
Jong-sung, I apologize for not seeing your question. And Faith, thank you so much for catching that. It really depends on what you mean by higher education. Because the thing is, higher education, we're talking about college. And I think the University of Hawaii and its associated community colleges does a good job. I really enjoyed my time at the University of Hawaii. I think Hawaii has a lot of cultural issues it still needs to work out. It is, let's be blunt, it is very Asian and it's very patriarchal. So when I was at the University of Hawaii, granted this is in the 1980s, one of the deans of the major schools was able to refer to a candidate, a female candidate for the law school, for the dean of law school position, as being bitchy. And that was in the newspapers, and this was accepted. It was okay to refer back then to refer to a woman that way. And there were a lot of sexual harassment issues. Usually male faculty on female students. Most of the students were Pacific Island or Asian heritage. It was, and whenever we complained, I say we because I filed a couple of complaints myself, you know, the university sided with the faculty and it never went anywhere. So I don't necessarily think that back in the 80s that we were supported. I don't know that the University of Hawaii was all that different from any place else at that time. I think now they have probably gotten better, although I don't have many ties with them. But Jung-sang, to your point, I'll also take that to high school education, because one of the things that we have to, you know, college is great, but we've got to get kids into college. And the school that I went to was the Kamehameha schools. It's a private school, very wealthy because it's founded on a land grant from the last of the reigning Hawaiian monarchs. And when I was going to this incredibly rich school, their expectations were the same. You're from low income, you're not in jail, we'll call it a win. It was not a college prep academy, even though they had all of the resources. They've turned that around. And my sister went to the same school 10 years later. And over a 10-year period, they went from less than 5% of students applying to college and getting in to everybody must apply to college as a graduation requirement. You have to at least apply to community college. And, you know, they had courses for test prep and everything. So they've really lifted their gaze at that school. And I'm so proud of them for doing so, because they want to make sure that all of their graduates have at least a chance to go to college. So Jung-sang, I hope that addresses your question. I say compliments from Eric. Eric, thank you so much. And Kai, thank you so much for your kind comments.
I have a question.
Yeah, Chastity.
So you touched on it earlier, but it's like pretty common in the legal field too. There's like no Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander women that I've seen, and also just like based on statistics that's given by the American Bar Association, Native Hawaiians make up less than 1% of the legal profession.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine that is a pretty similar experience in the STEM field and in higher education institutions as well. So my question is, how, like, with those factors, how did you navigate that as a Native Hawaiian? And also, how did you cultivate your own cultural identity while moving through those spaces?
Yeah, Chastity, fabulous question. To kind of the first part of what you said about there being, you know, very few Native Hawaiians in law, you know, that is one of the very sad things. What I'll say to this group is that my sister got her bachelor's degree and then got a law degree from the University of Hawaii School of Law. And so, and, you know, she is, as am I, a Native Hawaiian, and she practices at a firm in Honolulu. So Chastity, if you're interested in connecting with her, you know, and making contact with Native Hawaiian female lawyers or Pacific Island female lawyers, I can try to reach out to my sister and see if she would be, you know, willing to bring students into her network. I think that could be really, really nice. Yeah, no Native Hawaiians or no Pacific Island role models, no Pacific Island peers. It's lonely. It's a little bit lonely. But like I said, being a Pacific Islander, we are actually pretty cherished. And people think we're really cool, that our culture is really interesting. Once we get around the, no, we don't wear grass skirts and we don't live in grass shacks thing, you know, they are really interested in the culture. So it's nice to be cherished, but it is also lonely when you can't talk about, you know, aspects of your own cultural identity. Things that give me a lot of pride about my cultural identity, you know, there's been a renaissance in the Hawaiian culture in the islands, particularly of the Hawaiian language. And the last time I was at home, I was at a religious site, a heiau, And there was a group of teenagers, and their leader was speaking to them in fluent Hawaiian. I understood nothing. And the students were questioning in fluent Hawaiian, at least what to me sounded like fluent Hawaiian. And I was so awestruck by these gorgeous young people speaking their native tongue at a religious site, devoted to the gods of their native peoples. It was wonderful. I really wish that I could have been brought up through that experience. I mean, I know, a scant few words, mostly through the tourism industry, but it really is nice to see young people connecting with their cultural identity in such a deep and meaningful way. Mine, I will say, my identity as a Native Hawaiian is very diluted because I grew up at a different time. I also took a path that led me away from the islands, away from my culture. And so I miss what I don't have, but my way of making up for that is by supporting the young people in their journeys to have what they have and have what I have as well. That is a career in STEM. They don't have to give it up, I don't think. And for the young people, I would support them as they continue to maintain their very strong, very robust cultural identities. I see Gina's asking about the recording for the Zoom. Karen saying we can check with what's comfortable. For me, I'll say, Karen, whatever you want to do. I view this recording as entirely your property. Anything else that we can talk about?
I had a question, actually.
Yeah, Keiku.
How would you say, have you you probably have had experiences with, but how do you deal with microaggressions from being a Native Hawaiian woman? And how do you, I'm trying to find the best way to frame this.
Sure.
How do you want to help direct allies to like be better and more somewhat accommodating per se? But I just got to college, and one of the things that I noticed is that when I say that I'm from Hawaii, people are like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Hawaii looks so cool. I want to go vacation there. And then that I don't really like that a lot. Or
And why is that, Keiku?
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, like, have you ever like experienced that, or like any other microaggressions from being a Hawaiian person, and like how do you deal with that, especially in higher education?
Well, I'll say I don't know that I've ever experienced microaggressions. If I have, I'm kind of a blood instrument, so a lot of things don't penetrate. I've experienced macroaggressions, like outright racism. Like I call this place the Great White Supremacist Harvest, because they do not serve our kind, or they do not serve you people there. You people like Ph.D s from Yale, what? So, I just slag them off on social media whenever I can, and I never buy bread from them. But I've experienced stuff like that, big things, and it takes me by surprise. And usually I find that these events are hit and run. Like the guy that yelled at me in a grocery store parking lot to take my Kung Flu back to China, as he's driving past, and I'm standing there, and all I can do is stand there and just gawk. And then he's gone. A lot of racists are cowards. And so it's hit and run, and all you can do is then deal with it on your own, because there's nothing else to do except, lodge a complaint with the grocery store. But, in terms of microaggression, I don't know if I've ever felt it. And, a lot of people say the same thing to me, Keiku, like, oh, you're from Hawaii, that's so cool. Everybody wants to visit. And to me, I think that's fine. I encourage them to visit because, the islands run on an economy that is based on tourism. So the more people that visit, the better off my family is, the better off their economy is. So I always encourage people to go and visit. I don't view that as a microaggression, but that's my take on that. Is there something else that you can tell me about microaggressions towards Native Hawaiians or towards Pacific Islanders or Polynesians in general that you've experienced?
I suppose I remembered you mentioning earlier about weight issues within your family, and that is something that I resonated with because weight has been an issue within my family. My dad, who is Hawaiian, kind of like projected that onto me and my siblings, and we would often go on like phases of diets, and it would just be like majority of the week for dinner we'd have like low carb salads and baked chicken, and it just made me miserable because it made me crave junk food more. And I'd like, you know, like right after school, I would just go to like get burgers at the mall near me, and I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. I was just eating salad and like, I don't like this, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I think a lot of Pacific Island families struggle with that because it's, you know, let's face it, food is good and food in the islands is good. You know, I deal with that by, I cook, I prepare almost all of my own food. I will not allow myself to cook certain things. I won't even allow myself to investigate recipes about certain things. And these tend to be foods that I have in Hawaii. So like spam musubi, lau lau, kalua pig. Because if I could make those things for myself, I would, you know, and then I would eat. And so, but they also, I indulge fully when I'm at home. So it kind of retains that special home feeling for me, if that makes sense. But yeah, food is always a food, and my weight was always a big issue in my household. And you know, a lot of my friends in school growing up had the same thing because, you know, we were healthy kids, as they called us. You know, and then when I was growing up, it was kind of before body shaming was actually realized as being bad. There was, and in my elementary school, I was placed on the diet table where they just corralled all the fat kids, made us sit at the same table. Everybody in the school knew that that was the fat table. That was the diet table where they had double portions of salad, half portions of everything else, and skim milk. But, you know, I mean, it was like you may as well have stuck a big fat sign on my back saying, this one's fat, you know, placing me at that table. And every single kid at that table, you know, we'd slink in and we'd be like, oh God, everybody's staring at me. I'm on the fat table. This, you know, is terribly embarrassing. And we didn't talk over lunch. We just wanted to like eat as quickly as possible and get out so that we could get away from everybody staring at us. So yeah, lots of issues with weight and food. I see that we are now well past 1:30 at 1:42. I see a lot of people are taking their leave because people have things to do. Anything else that we can discuss with those of you that are still here?
Well, I think this has been such a useful and powerful presentation, and Les, I really appreciate you, you know, sharing like your journey. And I know that, like, you know, as the only Native student in my department in Madison, Wisconsin, it was so lonely, you know, a lot of that time. And I think that part of the reason we wanted to record some of this stuff was just because I think, you know, a lot of our students are, you know, they're just, like you said, one of the very powerful things you said was that finding a peer or finding a co-traveler on some of these journeys can be really helpful. And I personally have been taking furious notes of some ideas drawn on what you said. And I know this is going to be so helpful to us. And I know that some people have asked for the recording, and we will definitely post it, you know, at the conclusion. But I wanted to deeply thank you, Mato in my language. I just want to say, we are so grateful that you are here, and not just here, but you're a faculty member at Illinois. And we're just so grateful to have you here with us. And definitely, it's crazy how like school like Hawaii, exploit the asymmetry there, right? That you have relations there. And they do the same thing in Oklahoma for Native people.
That's terrible.
Right. But their loss is definitely our gain, and we really appreciate you. And I just want to thank you on behalf of anybody else. I know Keiko probably wants to say thanks as well. And Karen, I don't know, Faith, I don't know if you guys want to pop in.
Oh, thanks, Tol and Keiko. I really appreciate what you and Karen and Tol, what you all are doing here, setting up a community, a place for Pacific Island students to come together and find those colleagues, those co-journeymen, co-journey women, people that are walking the same roads, that we can be a little less lonely.
If we want to, I think that's a pretty strong conclusion. So I think we can end the recording. I don't know, Karen, if you can do that.
Yeah, thanks. Keiko, did you want to say a last word?
Just thank you for the people registrants that are still here. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Leslyn, for presenting and giving your time to talk about your experiences and like with the rest of us, and just really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.